All right, Section H, new visibility for women. So after the 19th Amendment is passed, and of course 1919, giving women the right to vote, they start to kind of carve out their own area in society. In politics, we see Eleanor Roosevelt really becoming the most prominent woman in the White House, but also during FDR's administration, he appoints the first woman cabinet member. So we see the Secretary of Labor being Frances Perkins, the first woman cabinet member, and also we see the highest ranking African American, at least politically at this time, is also a woman. The director of the Office of Minority Affairs, her name is Mary Bethune, okay? And really her job as Director of Minority Affairs is to make sure that African Americans get the equal benefits out of the New Deal programs. Okay, so besides politics, we can talk in the social sciences. We have two women who really make some strides in anthropology, Ruth Benedict and then also her student Margaret Mead, both make some strides in anthropology, so becoming more visible, right? Then finally, during this time, we have a Nobel Peace Prize author. Her name is Pearl Buck, and her famous novel is called The Good Earth, the one she wins the Nobel Prize for. And really, her background was interesting. She was raised by some American Presbyterians who were missionaries in China. So she actually grew up in China and learned a lot about kind of the peasant culture there. Okay, so we're just seeing women becoming more visible in politics and in society in general. All right, Section I, helping industry and labor. So 100 Days Congress passes a number of legislation, a lot of legislation that's trying to get labor and industry back on track. One of the first things they pass is they create the NRA, the National Recovery Administration. And what this does is it brings together about 200 different industries, and they meet together and make a big old list of different codes they all promise to abide by, and they're kind of fair competition codes. Things like maximum work hours, a minimum wage. It gives labor, meaning unions, actually some astounding rights. The NRA, through its codes, gives labor the right to organize and bargain collectively, which is that thing they've always wanted, right? They wanted to be officially recognized. And also forbids yellow dog contracts. Yellow dog contracts are contracts that say if you're going to work here, you cannot join a union. So also some restrictions on child labor. So this is just payday for unions, this NRA. Okay, so the symbol for this new NRA program is a blue eagle. Okay, so if you have a blue eagle, the little symbol displayed in your storefront, it means that you're going to abide by these fair competition codes. Okay, the problem was that not everyone who displayed this blue eagle actually abided by these codes. Okay, the blue eagle really became a symbol of hope for a lot of people. We see the football team, the Philadelphia Eagles, actually name themselves the Eagles based off of the symbol of the NRA. So very, very well known. However, the Supreme Court decided that this was an unconstitutional program, so it cut it. All right, fair enough. Okay, another program that's, or another administration that's created is the PWA, and we talked about this one briefly before. PWA, Public Works Administration, and this is headed by the Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ickes. Okay, and this was supposed to go for a long-range recovery. This isn't a relief program. This is a long-range recovery. And it spent $4 billion on over 34,000 projects across the United States. You know, public buildings, building highways, parkways. One of their biggest undertakings was actually building a dam on the Columbia River. Columbia River is in Washington, so kind of like northwest near the United States. And actually this plan to build a dam on this Columbia River got a lot of backlash because one, people were saying, why are we building a dam there? I mean, there's hardly any industry out there at this time, so where are you going to sell the electricity to? And also, dams help with farmers to irrigate farms, but people are saying we already have a surplus of farm goods, so why are you going to help out farmers increase their yield? That's not going to help anyone out. But then nonetheless, actually we see later on during World War II, building this dam on the Columbia River is a godsend because it really helps this area kind of just boom. Electricity, water, those are good things for people. All right. Okay, also kind of helping industry boom. A different kind of industry, the alcohol industry. So we see kind of baby steps in the initial repealing of prohibition. We see at first they legalize light wine and beer, saying alcoholic beverages that are under or have under a 3.2% alcohol content. So alcohol or beverages that wouldn't really intoxicate a person. And the idea is they put a $5 tax on each barrel in order to raise some funds. But then finally in 1933, prohibition is repealed, and of course because it was actually an amendment to the Constitution that took away alcohol, it has to be an amendment to the Constitution that brings back alcohol. So we'll see the 21st Amendment kind of repealing prohibition, allowing you know, the alcohol industry to come back to life. All right, Section J, paying farmers not to farm. Interesting. Let's discuss. So as we mentioned a number of times, farmers are really suffering because they have such low prices, because there's such overproduction of goods. And it was getting pretty bad. A lot of farms were being foreclosed on. There were some counties in Iowa that were so violent that they actually put those counties specific under martial law. People were getting desperate. Farmers were losing hope. So the 100 Days Congress, or the Emergency Congress, passes a number of pieces of legislation to help them out. For example, the AAA, not that one, right? Not going to fix your flat tire, but the AAA, the American Adjustment Administration, it helped to eliminate the surplus. And the way they did it was saying, hey, we're going to pay you not to farm. Okay, and the theory was that if they pay them not to farm, there'll be less, you know, agricultural goods produced, and therefore the surplus would kind of naturally go away. The prices of crops would increase. So that was more or less the theory. The problem was, however, when this was passed, I believe in 1933, farmers had already started to plant the crop this year. So wanting to take advantage of this no farm and we'll give you money scheme, a lot of farmers went back into their fields and started to plow under crops that are already growing. And this is the Great Depression, right? People are literally starving. People are going hungry, and they're seeing a bill that's encouraging farmers to plow under their fields. That does not sit well with a lot of Americans. And the same thing happened with the poor pigs, right? Wanting to lower or raise the prices of pigs or of pork, they would actually pay farmers to kill their pigs. So the pigs would, some of the meat actually made its way into the hands of the needy, but some of the meat kind of went to waste. They'd spread it over fields for fertilizer. Once again, millions of hungry Americans seeing pigs slaughtered and the meat wasted. They weren't a fan of this program. And guess who also wasn't a fan of this program? The Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court says, no, this is unconstitutional. Later, it's revised. In its place, Congress passes a new piece of legislation that is almost exactly the same, but a little bit different here. The new legislation that's put in place of the AAA is the Soil Conservation and Domestic Allotment Act. Okay, and what this is, it's the same idea. Paying farmers to keep fields fallow, meaning don't plant any crops in your fields and we'll pay you money. But the emphasis now was on conservation. They wanted you to conserve the nutrients in the soil, and so with this new conservation spin on more or less the same idea, paying farmers not to farm, the Supreme Court says that's fine, we'll let you do that one. Okay, so yes, Section K, dust bowls and black blizzards. Oh no. Okay, so if you want to see a map of where the Dust Bowl was, you can see a map on page 838 in your book. So anyway, 1933, we see this prolonged drought in the Great Plains of the United States, and it was dry, right? And there is a number of factors that led to the Dust Bowl. One of them being the fact that farmers during World War I had plowed under more fields. Okay. Also, we have the invention of the tractor. And tractors do a lot better job at ripping up the topsoil than any team of oxen could ever dream of. So we see more land being plowed under, and we see tractors ripping up like deeper into the topsoil, and then we have a drought. So we have a bunch of real bone-dry topsoils is hanging around, and it gets picked up by the wind, and it gets carried away, and that's bad for the farmers because their topsoil is kind of missing. That's the soil that has nutrients, but also it makes for a pretty devastating environment for humans to live in. People would sit on their front porches just kind of watching the topsoil be blown away. If you ever want to watch a documentary, right, Ken Burns, the public television documentary guy, made this really elaborate documentary on the Dust Bowl. It's really worth your time because I'm sure you have hours of extra time to watch documentaries. So anyway, so the thing is, people started just to give up. They said, we cannot farm in the Great Plains anymore. The Dust Bowl was absolutely devastating to them. They couldn't grow crops, so they would have to foreclose, or the bank would foreclose on their mortgage, so they would lose their farm. So about 350,000 people in the first, I think, 5 years of this actually left. And the majority of them ended up in Southern California. And while it wasn't as dusty in Southern California, it was still a super hard road, right? It was still poverty, it was still unemployment, it was just a hard, kind of a rough life for these people who were fleeing. I'm sure at one point you were supposed to have read The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Grapes of Wrath is more or less the Uncle Tom's Cabin, if you will, of the Dust Bowl. Really just showing the hardships these guys had to face. All right, so Congress wants to help these poor Dust Bowl farmers out, so they have passed, once again, some new legislation to help them out. For example, the Fraser-Lemke Farm Bankruptcy Act of 1934, what it did is it froze all mortgage payments for 5 years, okay? In case you don't know what a mortgage is a loan you take out on your house, or in this case, a loan you take out to pay for your farmland. So they said, we're going to freeze all mortgage payments for 5 years to ensure that farmers wouldn't lose their farms. Supreme Court said, okay, this is unconstitutional, so they changed it a little bit. So they said, okay, for the next 3 years, we're going to say or freeze all payments on your mortgage. So that helped some farmers out. Another thing they did is in 1935, they created the Resettlement Administration. And the Resettlement Administration was just supposed to help farmers move to some land that was actually fertile, that was actually farmable. So kind of resettle or relocate farmers to areas with better land. So both of these things tried to help out farmers. And then, additionally, kind of as a side note, the CCC is still going strong. Of course, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and they try to help these farmers by planting over 200 million trees, and these trees were supposed to act as a windbreak. So, the government was trying to help out these poor guys. All right, so the last thing to really talk about in this section specifically, they kind of threw it in with the farmers, but you know, why not? They talk about Native Americans, because our approach, that's probably not the word, our approach to Native Americans shift during the New Deal. So what happens is the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, the guy in charge of the Native Americans, his name is John Collier. And what he does is he reverses kind of the forced assimilation policies that had been in place since the 1880s. Remember 1887, we had the Dawes Act, not to be confused with the Dawes Plan. The Dawes Act had kind of forced tribes to assimilate, kind of dissolved all recognition of tribes, that sort of thing. So during the New Deal, they reversed that idea. They want tribes to become self-governing once again. And they do this in 1934 by creating or passing the Indian Reorganization Act, also kind of nicknamed the Indian New Deal. And what it did, like I mentioned before, encouraged the establishment of local self-governments and the preservation of their cultures. So it's like, you know, before when we told you to become good white farmers and to forget all of your heritage, well, we're going to take that back. Okay, you can have some self-government, and we would really encourage you to pick up on all of those traditions you probably already lost. So it was just kind of a change in philosophy. Some Native Americans were very against this or didn't like it because they thought that this measure kind of sought to make them into museum pieces, right? Okay, now you want us to be, you know, the Native Americans our fathers were, like, you know, what do you want from us? What do you want from us? But nonetheless, through this act, we see about 200 tribes actually take advantage of it and gain some autonomy once again, kind of some self-government once again. Right. Section L, battling bankers and big business. All right, so the 100 Days Congress, this emergency Congress, they're getting a lot of things done. One of the things they passed is the Federal Securities Act, also known as the Truth in Securities Act, and required stock promoters, guys who were, you know, trying to sell stock, to be completely upfront with the buyers. They had to have absolutely accurate information regarding the stocks they were selling. And they also, a part of that, or not a part of that, but also to kind of help along making sure that there was less corruption within the stock market, they passed the SEC. The SEC stands for Securities and Exchange Commission, which is more or less a watchdog organization or agency, you could say, to make sure that the rules are being followed. Okay, so we're trying to put some supervision on the stock market once again. And also we outlaw holding companies, or these kind of super corporations that aren't really making money by providing a service, but are making money by holding the stocks of a number of different companies. Anyway, those are outlawed by the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1933. So this just kind of goes to show you that the New Deal also takes some steps to reform big business, getting rid of the super corporations and placing some regulations on the stock market. All right, Section M, the TVA, harness the Tennessee. Okay, so, you know, this is the 1930s. The electrical power industry is a booming, right? People have electricity in their homes and they buy electricity. But the New Dealers felt that the average American was getting ripped off by the electric companies. So they also noticed at the same time that there's a very, very poor area of Tennessee. So what they want to do is kind of kill two birds with one stone, and they create the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. And this is by far the most radical of all the New Deal legislation that's passed, right? People in Europe haven't even heard of this. A lot of the New Deal ideas were kind of stealing from Europe, but this is an American idea, and it's quite radical. Conservatives will label this socialist, okay? It's very radical, and what it doesn't seem that radical, but we'll talk about it. What it does, it was the idea of George Norris of Nebraska, and what it does, it kind of planned the economy in this Tennessee River Valley. It dammed the Tennessee River, And by doing that, one, it's creating jobs because you're building dams, and two, it's also providing electricity inexpensively for citizens in that area. Okay, so it, like I said, there's a lot of positives. It's creating jobs, cheap electricity, there's some flood control now, the restoration of eroded soil, so kind of claiming more land back from the river, sort of speak, and it literally cleaned up the river. The river went from being brown to being blue, but the critics, they said it was socialist because you're providing electricity at such a low cost that you're leaving private industry out of this. There's no way that private electric corporations or companies could be in competition with such cheap electricity. Okay, so what happens is even Europeans see this and like, hey, this is great. It works wonderfully. It does give people jobs. It does give them cheap electricity. It does kind of follow through on all these promises, but the conservatives are making this big racket saying this is socialism to the T. So although the New Dealers wanted to spread this idea to other rivers like the Columbia River, like the Colorado River, like the Missouri River, it really doesn't, this idea doesn't leave Tennessee because conservatives were so staunchly against it, or so very against it. All right, last section for this video, section N, housing and social security. Okay, so we're going to throw some more acronyms at you because New Deal's busy creating all these agencies. Anyway, housing and social security. So the Federal Housing Administration, or the FHS, was created in 1934. And what it did is it gave small loans to families to build new homes or to improve or remodel existing homes. So once again, this is good for families because they get new homes or better homes, and it's good for business because they have to hire people to build these homes. And this is actually very popular, and this is one of the only pieces of New Deal legislation that actually sticks around in the long term, okay? The FHS, Federal Housing Administration. Another thing that was created a couple years later in 1937 was the USHA, the United States Housing Authority. And it was the same kind of idea, but it lent money to states and to communities, and the communities would use that money to build kind of housing units, kind of like apartments, for those who are very poor. Okay, because at this time, remember, slums, they still exist, and the landlords, they're not very nice people. So they want to get people into low-cost housing because there is a huge demand for this. So the U.S. Housing Authority lends money to states, to communities, to build low-cost housing or apartments, and that allows a lot of, the people on the lowest rung of the ladder, economically speaking, to have some sort of decent housing. They create over 650,000 units that were built, but really the idea here is there was such a big demand. This was a little too late, whatever that is, whatever that phrase is. There was even a bigger demand than what this could supply. So it was a good step, but it didn't quite expand or meet the demand for low housing that was in the United States at the time. And of course, it was attacked by landlords as unfair competition. How are we supposed to compete with these low-cost housing? Come on, we have to make money too. Also, realtors didn't like it. Well, nonetheless, okay, so we talked about housing, now we have to talk about the Social Security part. So Social Security, when you hear it today, typically you think of people who were retired getting money from the government. But back when it was created, it was really created for three reasons. Okay, one was it created federal and state unemployment insurance. So it's unemployment insurance. Two, it was money for the elderly. They get a monthly check in the mail from the government to kind of help them along. And then also the third thing is it gave assistance to the blind and the handicapped. So really it created for threefold reasons originally. And the Republicans in government, once again, were completely up in arms. Okay, they're like, what are you doing? This is so radical. This was a huge step forward, or something. It was a huge step. Okay, because here's the deal. Before, American had been very, farm-based, very agricultural, and a lot of families were huge. So when mom and dad wanted to retire or stop farming, it was a very natural progression, right? Their kids would take care of them, they'd slowly stop working the farm, and then after a while, maybe the oldest son would move into the house, farm the land, and take care of mom and dad. But now we have this new urban people. We have a lot more people living in the cities now. So now the United States is recognizing the fact that they kind of have to step up and take some responsibility for the welfare of their citizens. So in case you don't know, talking about old age pensions or Social Security given to retired folks, how it works is that it's a payroll tax. So every check that you're probably ever going to make, a portion of that is going to be taken out and then given to those who are actually retirement age right now. So the idea is that when you get to be retirement age, they're going to take money out of other people's checks who are younger than you and give you a portion of that every month. So it's kind of a pay it forward system. So people are very afraid or concerned that that system's not going to be able to be sustained in the United States. But that's how it works. It's a pay it forward system. Okay, so when you're old, the young bucks, the young kids are going to be giving you a check more or less every month. And right now, when you're working, that money's going to the people who are already retired. Okay. Yes. But one thing to note, and the last thing to note here, is that Social Security was not a new idea. It had been around. It had been in Europe. But in Europe, it was originally, or it had always been universal. So everybody, every mom, dad, uncle, brother who retired got some sort of benefit. But in the United States originally, something to keep in mind was it wasn't for everybody. It was only for those people who worked in certain industries, okay? So just so you know, eventually it became universal in the United States, but originally started out as just a benefit for the select few that were in certain types of industry. All right, with that, that's enough for this video, and we'll just, keep on going with more of the New Deal.